Greetings, vintage Star Wars fans. Welcome to another episode. It's been a while since I've done a full collection episode. Over the past several months, I have been tied up and at the mercy of ongoing home renovations that are still not completely finished. Unfortunately, this has pulled my focus away from filming new showcase videos. That said, the channel has not been completely quiet. During that time, I have had a series of pre-recorded memory bank videos which were already scheduled and releasing. Today, though, I am finally back with something I have been wanting to do for quite a while. A further look at my Darth Vader helmets. In this episode, I will be doing two unboxings, something old and something new. First, I will be unboxing a vintage Don Post Studios Darth Vader helmet from the 1970s, followed by an unveiling of a brand new EFX Collectibles A New Hope Darth Vader helmet, but this time, the black and chrome edition. To round everything out, I will then bring all four of my Vader helmets together for a side-by-side comparison. Since two of these helmets have already been featured in their own dedicated episodes, I will not be repeating those full breakdowns. This video is about context, evolution, and how these pieces represent different eras of collecting. So let's begin by unboxing my vintage 1970s Don Post Darth Vader helmet. Much like the Chewbacca mask, this one was also stored inside a vintage fast food box. That turned out to be a surprisingly good preservation method for the Chewie mask, so I'm hoping the same holds true here. Now, for those unfamiliar with Don Post Studios, the company had already been producing masks for decades before Star Wars ever arrived in theaters. By the late 1970s, they were one of the most well-known mask makers in the world, supplying everything from Halloween masks to licensed movie characters. When Star Wars exploded in popularity after 1977, Don Post was one of the companies that stepped in to produce officially licensed masks and helmets based on the characters from the film. And among those early releases was the Darth Vader helmet, a two-piece vinyl mask consisting of the face mask itself and the removable dome. Unlike the high-end prop replicas collectors are used to today, helmets like this were designed to be worn. The flexible vinyl mask could be pulled over the wearer's head fairly easily, and once it was in place, the dome could then be attached on top. That design made the helmet easier to wear and also simplified the manufacturing process for Don Post. And here it is, the Don Post Darth Vader helmet from the late 1970s. It's a little strange seeing this again after all these years. This is the very same helmet I wore on Halloween as a kid. The same helmet that sat up on the top shelf in my room while I played underneath it. In this old photo from my childhood, you can actually see it sitting high up on the shelf. It's a little hard to make out in the picture, but that dark shape right there is the same helmet. It was something I was very proud to display, and seeing it again now brings back a flood of memories. At first glance, the helmet may seem fairly simple compared to modern replicas, but there are actually several interesting details worth taking a closer look at. But before we take a closer look, this helmet could use a little attention. After more than 40 years in storage, it has accumulated its share of dust and fingerprints. When working with vintage vinyl masks like this, the goal isn't restoration, it's preservation. So for cleaning, we'll keep things simple. Distilled water, a small amount of mild dish soap, and a microfiber cloth. Helmets like this were never originally intended to survive for decades. They were designed as wearable costume pieces, something a fan might wear on Halloween, display for a while, and eventually replace as new merchandise appeared. Because of that, many of the surviving examples today show heavy wear, cracking, or fading from years of use. The vinyl used in these masks is flexible, but it can also become brittle over time if it isn't stored properly. So when cleaning a vintage helmet like this, the goal isn't to make it look new again. The goal is simply to remove surface dirt and preserve the material for the future. With the helmet cleaned up a bit, we can now take a closer look at some of the details that make these early Don Post helmets interesting. One of the easiest details to notice appears right here at the tips of the tusks on either side of the mouth grill. The early Don Post Darth Vader helmets from the 1970s featured small rounded nodes at the ends of these tusks. Later production during the early 1980s, around the time of The Empire Strikes Back, simplified the design by flattening the tips. Although it was less screen accurate, it made the helmets faster and easier to produce. You can see this difference in tusks is obvious on the later helmets due to the flat surface compared with the rounded nodes seen on the earlier versions. Another clue about the age of this helmet can be found on the inside of the mask. The molded lettering reads Star Wars, 20th Century Fox, and Don Post Studios. The presence of 20th Century Fox rather than Lucasfilm helps place this helmet in the earlier vintage era of Don Post production, generally associated with the late 1970s and early 1980s. From there, we can narrow things down a bit further. As we discussed earlier, this helmet still has the small rounded nodes at the ends of the tusks. Later production simplified those tusks into flat tips, which became the standard design by the time The Empire Strikes Back was released. Because of that, the rounded tusks on this helmet suggest it dates from the late 1970s rather than the early 1980s. An additional detail worth noting is the sharpness of the molded lettering itself. The imprint for Star Wars, 20th Century Fox, and Don Post Studios remains very crisp and clearly defined. This is noteworthy as over time, as injection molds are used repeatedly, those details can begin to soften. On this helmet, the lettering still appears quite sharp, which may indicate production while the molds were still relatively new. Of course, these helmets were never individually numbered, and Don Post didn't include production dates, so there's no way to determine the exact year a particular helmet was made. But taken together, the 20th Century Fox marking, the rounded tusk design, and the crisp mold details, it's reasonable to believe this example likely comes from an early production run of the Don Post Darth Vader helmet from the late 1970s. Helmets like this represent some of the earliest Darth Vader masks fans could purchase during the original Star Wars era. For many people in the late 1970s, pieces like this were the closest thing to actually putting on Darth Vader's helmet. And unlike modern collectibles, these early helmets didn't arrive in display boxes or elaborate packaging. Most of the time, you simply bought them off the shelf in a costume shop and carried them home in whatever bag the store handed you. They were meant to be worn, not preserved. Of course, Darth Vader helmets have evolved quite a bit since those early Don Post masks. Today, collectors have access to far more detailed and accurate replicas than were available during the original Star Wars era, and that brings us to a much more modern interpretation of the character. In fact, it brings us to my most recent Vader helmet purchase, the EFX Darth Vader A New Hope helmet, black and chrome edition. I actually ordered this helmet in October of 2025 with the intention of doing a Halloween-themed video. But as often happens, home renovation projects had other plans, and the video ended up being delayed until now. The black and chrome edition is essentially a special finish variation of EFX's original Darth Vader helmet replica. The sculpt is based on molds that trace their lineage back to the helmet used in the original Star Wars, and it's the same mold that my other EFX Vader helmet was made from, back in episode 14. The original helmet was sculpted by Brian Muir during the production of Star Wars. After filming was completed, makeup artist and creature designer Rick Baker created molds taken from the screen-used helmet, which were then used to produce promotional Darth Vader costumes that toured in 1977. Now, I did record me taking this helmet out of the product packaging, but it came out blurry for some reason, and so I am going to spare you those details and jump right into the package contents. But first, let's take a quick look at the box. At first glance, it is very similar to the standard packaging found on the original EFX Vader helmet. The back reveals the same basic packaging narration as the original helmet. However, the black and gunmetal gray color scheme references are removed for obvious reasons. Before taking a closer look at the helmet itself, the box also includes a few pieces of documentation that come packaged with the replica. First is a safety notice provided by EFX. These replicas are designed as collectible display pieces rather than toys, so the manufacturer includes a short advisory outlining proper handling and usage. In addition to the safety notice, the package also includes a product certificate of authenticity along with the warranty documentation for the helmet. These are fairly standard inserts for high-end collectible replicas and help document the authenticity and purchase of the piece. Now, let's get to the moment we've been building toward, the reveal of the black and chrome helmet itself. When I first saw this helmet in person, I'll admit I was a little perplexed by it. At first glance, the finish seemed almost too chrome for me, and I wondered if it might end up feeling more like a novelty piece than a serious replica. But once I placed it under proper lighting and started photographing it, my opinion began to change. The reflections across the surface actually capture the shape of the helmet surprisingly well. In certain lighting, it almost feels like something that could have appeared on screen. Over time, it has definitely grown on me. In fact, it has become one of my favorite Vader helmets in the collection, second only to the 1995 Dawn Post Deluxe from The Empire Strikes Back. Like the original design, the helmet is constructed as a two-piece assembly consisting of the face mask and the dome. The helmet also features bubble lenses, machined aluminum tusks, and metal mouth and chin grills, all built as a full-scale one-to-one replica intended primarily for display. Unlike the vintage Dawn Post helmet we looked at earlier, replicas like this are designed from the beginning as collector display pieces rather than wearable costume masks. The focus here is accuracy, presentation, and craftsmanship, bringing fans as close as possible to the look of the helmet seen on screen. But this helmet becomes even more interesting when we place it alongside some of the other Darth Vader helmets that have appeared over the years. Here we have it up alongside the Dawn Post Deluxe Darth Vader helmet released in 1995. We covered this helmet in detail in Episode 3, but it represents Dawn Post's attempt to produce a much more accurate collector version of Darth Vader, decades after their original costume masks of the 1970s. Now let's look at the black and chrome edition compared with the standard EFX A New Hope Darth Vader helmet. We looked at this original helmet in detail for Episode 14. Unlike the black and chrome edition, this version recreates the traditional appearance of the helmet as seen on screen. Now let's take a moment to look at these EFX helmets next to the original Dawn Post helmet from the late 1970s. As you can see, the scale and proportions are completely different. When placed beside the more modern collector helmets, the original Dawn Post mask can look a little unusual. But in fairness to the vintage helmet, it actually looks much better in person than it does in photographs. For whatever reason, it just doesn't seem to photograph very well at all. It's certainly not as accurate as the modern replicas, but when you see it in real life, the overall appearance is far more forgiving than what the camera tends to capture. When we look at all four helmets together, it becomes much easier to see how interpretations of Darth Vader's helmet have evolved over nearly 50 years. Here we have a complete look at the lineage with the late 1970s Dawn Post helmet, a wearable costume mask, 1995 Dawn Post Deluxe, an early collector-grade attempt, the EFX A New Hope helmet, a highly accurate prop replica, and of course the black and chrome edition, a stylized collector variation. But unlike the modern collectible helmets we've just looked at, the original Dawn Post masks from the late 1970s were never really designed with long-term preservation in mind. Back then, you simply bought them right off the shelf at a costume shop or magic store. There was no collector packaging, no display stand, and certainly no archival storage box. Because of that, if a helmet like this is going to survive for another several decades, a little creativity is required. Properly storing and protecting this mask is something it has probably needed for a very long time. So before this helmet goes back into storage, let's take a look at the system I've put together to help protect it going forward. After doing a bit of research, I discovered that a vintage vinyl mask like this really shouldn't just be stored on a simple foam display head. Over time, the material can slowly lose its shape if it isn't supported properly. So the goal here is to give the helmet the support and protection it needs, so it can remain stable and ready for display for many years to come. The first step is supporting the mask itself. Instead of using a lightweight foam head, I chose a sturdy, clear mannequin display. The rigid structure helps maintain the natural shape of the mask while preventing it from collapsing or deforming over time. Another advantage of this style of head is that it doubles as a display stand. So if the helmet is ever removed from storage, it's already mounted and ready to be displayed. Before placing the mask onto the mannequin head, I added a thin cotton balaclava over the surface. This creates a soft barrier between the plastic display head and the inside of the helmet. The fabric helps prevent scuffs or friction against the vinyl, while also providing a very slight cushion so the mask rests more naturally. Because it's lightweight and breathable, it protects the helmet without trapping moisture. The next piece is a small foam spacer that sits between the face mask and the dome. Since this helmet is made from two separate parts, allowing the dome to rest directly on the mask during storage could place pressure on the mounting points over time. In order to prevent that, a small puck of archival polyethylene foam is used as a spacer. The foam is firm enough to support the dome, but soft enough that it won't damage the helmet's surface. When the dome is placed on top, the foam keeps the two sections separated just enough to remove stress from the connection points while still allowing the helmet to sit naturally. To store this helmet safely, I'll be using acid-free archival tissue paper to help protect it while it sits inside the storage box. This type of tissue is commonly used for archival storage because it's designed to protect delicate surfaces without introducing chemicals or acids that could damage materials over time. It's lightweight, non-abrasive, and ideal for cushioning vintage items like this helmet during long-term storage. For the container itself, I ordered a set of heavy-duty corrugated cardboard storage boxes specifically sized to house the helmet and its support system. The goal was to find a box strong enough to support the contents while also providing enough interior space for the helmet, mannequin head, and protective materials to sit comfortably without placing pressure on any part of the mask. With the mannequin head supporting the mask and the dome protected by the foam spacer, the helmet can now be placed carefully inside the box. The acid-free tissue is then placed around the helmet to create a light protective cushion. The goal isn't to pack the helmet tightly, but simply to provide enough support so that the helmet remains stable and protected while stored. This helps prevent the helmet from shifting inside the box while also protecting the surface from dust and incidental contact. Before sealing the box, I'll also be including a small amount of documentation with the helmet. This helps preserve some basic historical information about the piece so that anyone opening the box in the future understands exactly what it is and how it has been stored. Finally, the box itself is labeled so the contents can be easily identified without needing to open it. Clear labeling also helps ensure that the helmet is handled properly whenever it is moved or accessed in the future. With everything properly supported and protected, the helmet is ready to be placed into long-term storage. After more than 4 decades, this helmet has already survived quite a journey. With a little care and proper storage, the hope is that it will remain preserved for many years to come. Helmets like this were never really intended to survive for nearly 50 years. They were originally produced as simple costume pieces, something a fan might wear for Halloween, display on a shelf for a while, and eventually replace when the next wave of merchandise arrived. But over time, pieces like this have become small artifacts from the earliest days of Star Wars collecting. For me, this one carries an extra layer of history. It's the very same helmet that once sat on the top shelf of my childhood room, the same helmet I wore on Halloween all those years ago. And now, after all this time, it's finally being stored the way it probably should have been from the very beginning. With that, we come to a close of another episode. I hope you enjoyed this journey into my childhood memorabilia and look forward to sharing more discoveries as we go. Until next time, take care, and may the Force be with you.